Welcome to OCMH's Reflections on 10 Years of Children's Mental Health in Wisconsin. OCMH has been celebrating its 10th anniversary throughout 2024, and we're wrapping up our year-long celebration with this special panel discussion reflecting on OCMH and Wisconsin's children's mental health over the past decade. So we're going to take a look at kids' mental health over the past decade. But before we introduce the panel and get into our discussion, we're pleased to have with us one of the original members of the OCMH team and a partner in our work throughout the entire 10 years, Kim Ethan, who's going to offer her reflections on OCMH's 10th anniversary. Kim?
Thank you, Linda. Today, I want to share the story of how Wisconsin's Office of Children's Mental Health came to be. A journey that underscores the power of advocacy, collaboration, and a shared vision for a better future for Wisconsin's children. The idea of the Office of Children's Mental Health was born from the relentless advocacy of parents who understood the urgent need for systemic change. Hugh Davis and Paula Beege from Wisconsin Family Ties were instrumental in pushing the initiative forward. They organized and led the team of advocates that promoted it with their efforts, resulting in the office's inclusion in the 2013 to 15 biennial budget, a remarkable achievement driven by their passion, determination, and numerous hours in the offices of the department secretaries, the governor, and legislators, and in front of the Mental Health Council and its committees. In 2014, Elizabeth Hudson was chosen as the first director, and I had the privilege of being a part of the initial team alongside Joanne Stevens, the family relations coordinator, and Kate McCoy, the data analyst. From the start, we embraced the collective impact approach and worked closely with the Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board and Rebecca Murray in particular, as she joined us in going around the state, explaining the collective impact strategy, inviting people to join us, and co-hosting the initial meeting to kick off the effort. I had asked Karen for a list of the people who still received this invitation, and many of you are still here today that were in that first initial room and joined us that first year. I was going to read off the names, but it was probably a quarter of the committee that is still here. So our early focus was on promoting trauma-informed care, elevating the voices of those with lived experiences, both parents and youth, and fostering resilience. Wisconsin had already been laying the groundwork in trauma-informed care and the Adverse Childhood Experience, or the ACEs education, with Elizabeth leading the Shift Your Perspective campaign, which was a powerful reminder that the question isn't what's wrong with you, but rather what happened to you. Here at the Office of Children's Mental Health, the Collective Impact Council determined that the first three committees would be access, trauma-informed care, and resiliency. These set the foundation for the work.
Oh my
And then
gosh,
late,
Nicole
the
Sorosi's on
infant
here.
toddler joined thanks to several collaborative grants focused on early childhood led by Lana Schuyler Nanide, Kia Jensrud, and Jane Pennerhop that truly aligned with our collective impact approach. And then a data team joined that was led by Kate McCoy that worked across departments to give us a more holistic picture of what was happening with children and families. And then in 2021, the office refined its strategic focus to emphasize the social connectedness of youth, a critical factor in mental health and well-being. And this social connectedness of youth remains the center of our work today. So thank you all for your efforts and your continued commitment to supporting Wisconsin's children and families.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for that excellent history of the office and for your continued partnership throughout all of these years. It's been wonderful. So for our event today, we've gathered a panel of children's mental health advocates and OCMH partners to share their comments and reflections on Wisconsin children's mental health. We will have with us Representative Pat Snyder from Schofield, Representative Jill Billings from La Crosse, Julie Heller, who's manager of the Racine Collaborative for Children's Mental Health, Nick Christoco, a young adult lived experience partner with OCMH, and Myra McNair, who is the founder and director of the Anesis Center for Marriage and Family Therapy in Madison. So, and we are putting a link to their bios in the chat if you want to learn a little bit more about one of the panelists. Throughout the hour, we'll be calling on them to share their reflections on key trends in children's mental health. But let's start by looking at some compelling data points that demonstrate the changing landscape of children's mental health over the years. For this, I'm going to turn the mic over to Amy Marsman, our OCMH Senior Research Analyst. Amy?
Thank you, Linda. I am going to start with anxiety here on this slide, but and I'll run through this fairly quickly, but we will show a summary at the end. So a group of trends in a moment. The First of all, the caveat is the following data come from a long running survey given to high school students every 2 years, the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And it shows us that there's been a notable increase in anxiety over the years. More than half of high school students now report anxiety, including 2/3 of high school girls. Next slide. Depression has also increased over the last 10 years by 42% between 2013 and 2023. Now, more than a third of students report being persistently sad and hopeless. Next slide. Similarly, the rates of self-harming have increased over the years, and these are affecting girls at more than twice the rate of boys. So you see on each slide, we have the total student population surveyed, the boys' rate, and the girls' rate. Next. Here too, the rates of kids who seriously considered suicide have increased over the 10 years, with nearly a quarter of girls now reporting that they had seriously considered suicide within the last year. In each of these four key mental health indicators, there's been a marked increase in the concerns over time, excuse me, over time. While it's not shown here or in every graph, we know from the data that kids of color and LGBT students have worse mental health outcomes when compared to their peers. So we know that the trouble is disproportionately affecting different groups of students. I'm going to turn it back to Linda, who will have our panelists provide some insight and reflection on these data trends.
Thanks, Amy. And yes, as Amy said, we're going to turn to our panelists now. I'd like to start with Nick. Nick, from your perspective, as a person with lived experience who was a student for some of these last 10 years and is currently working with students, what's your reaction to these data points?
So I definitely agree with the data points being shown in real time, real speed, being able to experience it and see it firsthand. I think it's telling that we have gotten a much more stressful environment. Think about COVID, think about political strife, think about um, a lot of families being divided by differences in values. It's a lot of anxiety inducing um, environments that we have to focus on as well, not just the trends of the individuals.
So a lot of reasons for why we're seeing these data points. There are lots of factors coming into it. Myra, as a therapist and a director of a family therapy center, do these data points reflect what you've been seeing among your families?
Oh, absolutely. I think, since the pandemic, we have had a lot of isolation, kids have. And then coming back after the pandemic, trying to get into that new routine, gaining those social skills, right? So we're seeing a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of kids that have fallen behind in school. And so school, there's a lot more to navigate than before because you're trying to navigate the social and also the academics, and a lot of kids are feeling really uncomfortable in navigating both of those things. We're seeing also, I would say, an increase in, referrals for ADHD because of that. Like we don't necessarily think they always meet the criteria, but I think it has a lot to do with more the anxiety and the depression, and then falling behind in school and then not being able to pay attention, right? Because you don't really know what's going on. Um, I think kids have learned other coping skills during the pandemic around, because there was isolation. So like gaming, social media, and technology. And we know all those things can really increase anxiety and increase depression and also increase isolation. So I feel like this data is right on in what we're seeing in the office every day and referrals. I would say it's probably even higher, you know what I mean, than what we're seeing the data showing.
Well, thank you for that observation. Unfortunately, that it paints an even more troubling picture than what the data are showing. And as we can see the trends over the years, that's really concerning.
Yeah.
So I think we want to move on to the next slide. And here we're going to, now that we've heard about some of the conditions that are affecting the anxiety and depression that kids are experiencing, the next thing is, are they getting support for this? And what we see from this slide is that less than half of kids with mental health conditions actually receive or access mental health services. So the next question for our panelists is, what are you seeing in your community in terms of increased demand and kids not accessing treatment? And I was wanting to go to Representative Snyder first for that.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
Luckily, we just had a Rogers Behavioral Health Clinic open up in Wausau. Just last week, they had their ribbon cutting. This, I think, will add a lot for the young kids in our community, because like other communities, we're seeing that there's just not enough counselors or psychiatrists, psychologists to be able to see all these kids. I also think I would love to work on a situation where the kids in school could maybe have a once a year counselor or psychologist checkup just to see how they're doing and maybe head off some of the red flags that could be occurring. Because I think between this social media that seems to be nothing but a lot of times negative and putting stress on these kids, thinking that there's nothing going to be good for them when they get to be adults or down the road, is always pessimistic news or social media. And I think that's one of the biggest accelerators to this. And I think too, with the way the phones are in our society, it used to be you sit down with dinner with your parents and family and talk about things. I don't know if that happens much anymore. So we just need more places like Rogers Behavioral, but also maybe try to work on things that we could eliminate the stigma and have these kids be able to see some professionals, maybe like we get physicals every year and the insurance cover it, do something similar for kids.
Thank you. That's a theme that our office has really taken a good look at. And we worked with organizations around the state who have been doing some annual screening of youth and put together a playbook on how to get that started in your community.
Oh, that'd be great to share if you want.
Yeah, maybe someone from the team can get the link to that in the chat. We have a webpage on student mental health, and it's there on that webpage. But I always like to bring up that what we learned from folks who are doing this kind of screening is that they learn a lot about kids' strengths. It's about also looking for wellness and not just looking for illness. So, but Representative Billings, do you have some comments on this issue about accessing treatment?
Thank you. I do. I've spoken about this on the floor, as has Representative Snyder. In fact, there's something called PolitiFact, where when a legislator gives out statistics or makes a comment, the media gets involved and fact checks them because they have a hard time believing the numbers. But when I talked about our challenges with lack of mental health caregivers in schools recommended versus what we're actually able to do in Wisconsin, people couldn't believe the numbers. And I was fact checked on it, and it was found out that I was true. It's like true, mostly true, neutral, mostly false, and a pants on fire lie. And legislators get a little nervous when they're fact checked, but it was found that it was true. That we have a huge challenges in our school district with providers for kids that need services. And so along with that comes burnout for those professionals that have those huge caseloads of kids. And the thing is that schools touch almost all of the kids in Wisconsin. So it's a really important and good place for delivery of services. And I think there's less stigma maybe if kids get those services in schools. So schools play such an important part in this. At the same time, we see that schools are struggling with their budgets, that so many schools went to referendum for operating budget this last election. And some of them got the community support. Some of them did not make that case to the community in a way that they found success. So I have great concerns about that. And in lacrosse, we see those challenges. Another sidelight that many of you already know is that along with treating kids, if you can treat parents, often there are familial issues there, and that provides such success if you can help parents and kids. Because if you're sending kids back home to an environment that doesn't have good mental health, it's a challenge for those kids. So I've also heard more this last year from parents specifically who maybe were less hesitant to speak up and are now saying, especially with older children with mental health needs, I am struggling with my child and I need relief. I need help from the state. So I'm hopeful. I really respect Representative Snyder's idea of the screening in schools, and the challenge is going to be making sure we have healthcare professionals to provide services for what we discover from screening. But I think that's an important element. And I'm hoping that we can, along with people like you and the general public, bring more attention, even more attention. And the Office of Children's Mental Health has done a good job with this, but bring even more attention to this issue and get relief from the legislature.
Thank you. Yeah, again, so many important points that you raised. And the screening question is, there's always this concern about, will there be a lot of kids identified who need treatment? Well, we heard from folks who are doing it is that those numbers are not very high. And that screening then creates an opportunity to maybe engage with parents about, do you need some support? Can we find a way to help your student? So I think it creates possibilities as well as identifying issues. So, but I wanted to give Julie Heller a chance to weigh in on this issue. Julie, from your perspective as someone who's organizing treatment in the schools, and we know that 75% of kids who actually get treatment get it at school, how do you think about this issue?
First of all, I want to just do a shout out to Representative Schneider and Billings. You guys are doing awesome work at the state and really bringing this issue into the forefront, into the eyes across the state. I really have appreciated that. I just want to back up and kind of talk about, what we kind of see in vision. When I look at statistics like this, schools can do a lot, but this is a new kind of, I would say we're kind of putting some new things into schools. And I have a great passion around mental health, and I think doing mental health in schools is the right thing. And I 100% support that and want to see the services grow for kids, because I know that when we have comprehensive mental health systems and we have tiered level of supports for kids, that schools can do a lot to really improve the mental health of our kids, and they don't necessarily need to see an outside provider. And so I love the ability, and I think I just want to do a shout out to our Department of Public Instruction in building our comprehensive mental health system and really giving guidance to schools on how to do that and continue to leverage that work. When I look at this data point though, and I just want to talk from a perspective, I'm a kind of like, what's the core issue here? What's going on? And I think we talked about some of those things, provider availability, the big things that come to me when I look at this data point, and I really want to say 3 buckets for me. And my buckets are stigma. Stigma is still alive and well, especially in the culture of our families of color and who is having issues with access to services, not believing that that's going to be helpful, even feeling frightened that the word mental health is being used. And we have done programs where we can't even use the word mental health. We have to call it something else, mental well-being, stress reliever, but it's all the same kind of bucket. And so I think that's an important thing to note, that in schools, doing mental health literacy is also a key component of this. This lives and breathes in us being comfortable with starting to talk about mental health with each other. And as I look at the impact of COVID and looking at our teens and our youth today, they have more comfort. And I've been just enjoying to see them talk about mental health, wanting to do projects on mental health, and wanting to educate their peers about mental health. And I think those are great things. The other thing that I really see in all of this is access. And what does that look like? And a lot of times we're making referrals outside to community mental health providers, to families, and we say, hey, call here. And families get really confused about what services are looking for. A lot of times their insurance aren't being accepted. We have a long wait list. And so parents feel frustrated, but also, our families are stressed, and it's really hard sometimes to navigate the system. And I really have seen that some solutions to that is really schools providing behavioral health navigation, helping families, holding that hand, making sure, did you make that connection? And I have absolutely seen that grow in the last handful of years in a direction that really makes sense for our families, and how do we better support each other, right? And so this is another piece of that puzzle on the access side. School-based mental health clinics have improved access for our students. We have made it easier. Families have supported it. They continue to want us to grow services. Here at Racine Unified, we are in 9 different schools. I have 9 full-time therapists in each of our locations. And this is a system that has worked for us. And then the other thing that we really started to come back, probably in the last couple of years for us here in our district at Racine Unified, is really helping families with that financial barrier. What we have seen is a lot of families are out there with insurance now because they're working, but they don't have the means to pay $5,000 to $8,000 because they have a high deductible plan. And so we've been able to help support families differently here, and we continue to work on this. We call Access for All, and it's a financial assistance program they offer with our partners, Children's Wisconsin. And students can access services in our school-based mental health services, and we assist the families in helping to pay the cost of that care. And so I really feel like as communities come together around this issue, we've been really able to do some really great things over the last 10 years, and with the support of the Office of Children's Mental Health, to really start to look at all the different things we're doing to help support kids. And I think this is one piece of data that I have really looked at and really continue to work at with our families here in our Racine community.
Thanks, Julie. There's so much going on in your program, and so many really great efforts happening there. So we appreciate your partnership too. Okay, so now let's take a look at protective relationships that are helpful for youth: school belonging, trusted adults at school, and peer relationships. Amy, what do you have to share with us on these items?
Thank you, Linda. I want to start by saying many of you on this call are maybe familiar with the main indicators of youth mental health that we just discussed, the rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harming, but not everyone is aware of the factors that protect mental health. And this is what we call the protective factors. There
Yes,
are
we just
many.
got a whole bunch too. I ordered a bunch.
There are many protective factors that actually can help to compensate for a negative childhood experience or adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. And we do have data on these protective factors from the same survey that I went over earlier. So I'm going to talk about a few of them, and I invite questions if anything is unclear. But we want to start with school belonging because, in part, because this has an incredible impact on youth wellness and overall well-being. Um, Unfortunately, what we see in Wisconsin is that the rate of teens who feel they belong at their school has dropped 20 percentage points in the last 10 years. So, um, 10 years ago in 2013, almost 3/4 of students said they felt like they belonged at their school. And now about a half say they feel like they belong at their school. And just to, put a fine point on it, this is where kids are spending the majority of their time. This is where they have their peer relationships, for better or for worse, and where they are most likely to connect with a supportive adult outside of their parents or family. So the fact that school belonging has declined so steadily over the 10 years is quite alarming to us. Next. The other protective factor that we want to talk about are supportive adults at school. Um, Again, the YRBS survey, it asks students if they have a supportive adult at school, and it could be a teacher or a coach. It could be anybody in the building. And here we see that there was also a decline over the 10 years, with the largest dip in 2021. And that's likely due to the pandemic. And then there was a small rebound last year. Despite this rebound, 30% of high school kids still say they don't have an adult at school who they could talk to. They have nobody they could talk to about a problem. And this disproportionately impacts students of color who report much lower numbers of supportive adults at school. So we have, as Julie was just describing, we have an opportunity in the school setting to really reach out to youth and target who we're reaching out to in particular. Next. Now this graph comes from, this is data that comes from the National Survey of Children's Health, which asks parents to respond with their children ages 6 to 17 in mind. So it's different from the YRBS survey of high school students. The results here show that fewer kids are having trouble making and keeping friends. So that's good news. In this slide, the fact that the bars are getting smaller is good news because it means fewer kids are having relationship problems, fewer kids are, or I should say more kids are able to make friends and keep those friendships. So while that downward trend is good, there are still nearly a quarter of kids who have trouble with friendships. And again, we can talk about how school um, can really help address some of the relationship skills, conflict resolution, and teaching these life skills, how that actually helps kids navigate in school, navigate their friendships, but also actually has really long-term impacts on their mental health well into adulthood. Next slide. This is those 3 slides just summarized here in one view for you. Again, the difficulty with friendships, it's getting better, but sense of belonging and having somebody to talk to at school is getting worse over time. So our panelists, I believe, are gonna discuss the protective factors a little bit more. So I'll just turn it over to Linda unless there are any questions for me.
So Nick, let me go back to you again. What do you think about these data here? The protective relationship data, and the belonging data? Do they resonate with what you've been hearing from the students you work with?
Absolutely. So when I was in high school and then now working with school age clients, being able to find a space where you fit is becoming harder because things are becoming more uniform. We're not teaching social skills in schools. We're not teaching home ec. We're not teaching art or music. We're not pushing that nearly as much as we had prior to. Like I remember being in school and having home ec be an elective and not required. Um, I took art classes because I wanted to, but they were not required. We're not rounding our students. They're not becoming well-rounded um, adults who know their hobbies and what they enjoy because we're spending so much time in school just focusing on purely academics. And then what do you do in your free time after that? You don't know who you are as a person, so of course you're not going to know the people that you want to interact with.
That's really important. I mean, one of the other protective factors that we take a look at is participation in extracurricular activities. That is important for you know, brain development, for healthy brains, and for belonging. So we're always telling people if you can't find a something exactly at school that you feel like you belong to, is there an extracurricular activity you belong to? And that could be an avenue for you to develop more friendships. And the friendship thing it's more complicated than just friendships. This is about, as you're indicating, Nick, it's really about learning how to get along with people, developing trusting relationships, which we hear from educators all the time is a foundation for learning. So really important issues.
I think another thing that goes with that, first of all, yes, absolutely extracurriculars, but with what time? We're focused so much on heavy academics and homework that by the time you get to after school and do your 3 hours of homework, what do you have after that? What energy do you have? And then secondly, we were talking about learning how to get along with people. Again, those social skills. It's not just about friendship, it's about being able to have a discussion with someone you disagree with without necessarily being at each other's throats. I was in speech and forensics, competitive public speaking as an extracurricular in school, and that really helped me learn how to take other people's viewpoints and formulate my own based on um, objective information that we both shared. But that was, again, an extracurricular. That was not something that was taught to me in school.
Yeah, important points. And those are themes that we also hear from educators, is that they recognize the importance of these things, but there's so much focus on testing and on academics that they're not able to get to those. Let me turn now to Julie. So again, taking this from your role in terms of, you know, really organizing support for kids throughout a number of schools, what do you think about what's happening with these protective factors?
And I think, Nick, I just want to recognize, you're spot on, kids feeling like I don't belong in this group. And I start to really kind of tear this apart a little bit. And I want to get back to protective factors. But when you start to look at core issues of what kids are experiencing and really start to think about, okay, what's happening with this data? This data concerns me. Some things, what keeps you up at night is the growing mental health issues, right? And the other thing that for me, when I start to look at at least our Racine County data, is I start to see a tick up on kids thinking about suicide. And that worries me as well. And so when I start to look at this connection piece, this friendship piece, remember that social emotional learning and districts across the state are doing all different things. And so I know that we have had a huge focus here in Racine on SEL. We have started with our littles. And so when we start there, and I was, kind of thinking about this, but, they're kind of getting to the age where we're hitting into middle school and high school. So I'm really I'm kind of even like looking forward to the next YRBS, which is coming out relatively soon, and looking at, okay, are we seeing that impact? But the thing that I really wanted to focus on in this conversation with this panel today is kind of those core issues with kids in this data point, like what's behind it. I'm a good 5 whys person. Why is this? Why? And I kind of just question things. And so you kind of look at social anxiety. There's a lot of social anxiety. And you look at the impact, a lot of this data is coming right during that pandemic time too. And when you start to see those dips in 21, you're going to know we're kind of coming out of that, right? And we're still kind of struggling with that. So 25's data is going to be really interesting for me to see. But the other thing that Nick talked about a lot was that lack of shared interest. Who has that? We like people like ourselves, our common interest. We have something to talk about. We have passion. And I think also the cyberbullying, that impact is also another core issue that really has created some of those mental health concerns that we are seeing on the rise. But I also think too that when we look at equity, we look at diverse social backgrounds in our schools, and is there somebody that looks like me, understands me, or am I having difficulty finding that person in my building? And so I think that's another piece that we have to look at. We have to look at equity. We have to look at giving teachers the right skills and that education around equitable access. And then the other thing too is really that lack of ability to kind of collaborate, common interests. How do we do that in a way that builds strength within our kids and builds that protective factor? And so when I really start to look at all these things together and really look at, because I'm one to about solutions, I'm like, what can we do about that? Bringing youth voice to the table to help solve this issue is awesome. They know what to do. They do. And I have had great conversations with our youth, and they're like, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. This is what we need. But I think to Nick's point, it is really, and the extracurriculars happen, but what happens is sometimes we leave our most vulnerable kids behind because they don't have access to that. And I want to say that out loud because that is true. It does help. I mean, yes, but now we have to start to create interest with kids that are different within that school setting. So how do we create opportunities to collaborate? How do we create positive interactions with teachers and teachers becoming that sense of support for students and realizing how important that relationship is? But the other piece of this is getting better at SEL in our middle and high school setting, because conflict resolution is something that we're, like I said, our littles are starting to get that, but conflict resolution is a skill. We're not all born with it. It's not innate. It's not like, yeah, I know how to do this. And it takes practice, and it takes time, and it takes support. And back in the day of our peer mentoring programs and kids coming together with diverse backgrounds, I love that. And I'd love to see that come back in. We're starting to do a lot with peers, leading the way and educating around mental health. But build that, grow that, continue to do that. And I think those are things that really kind of are the things that are at the forefront of what we really need to do to impact this data point. And just to give you a real life example out of what we're doing at our schools, and I know this is happening across the state at other schools, but at Racine Unified, we have developed an academy model for kids. And now we're starting to build it all the way through, but we have middle and high school now where kids start to really feel valued. They're valued by their community. And I think that's another piece here that with school belonging is a community, but it also may be reflective of what's happening in our community. Giving kids that sense of hope. What's your future like? This is a scary time in high school. We're looking at, like, there's a lot of stress in high school, not only from the academic point, but the future. Where's our future? What's my next step? What am I going to do? We have introduced kids to different career opportunities through academy work here in Racine, where they can go into a business academy, a healthcare academy, engineering academy, culinary arts academy, and they can learn about career options and they can try different things out, and giving them that sense of hope. Here are the jobs that we have in our community, and giving value to youth that they are the next generation and giving them that support they need to continue to launch. And I think that piece of some really great things that have been happening in our community are supporting and wrapping around the value that youth is an asset in our community, and to bring that up and to really help nurture them. Because when we start to really look at that youth power that they have, let's build those leadership capacities. And I think the Office of Children's Mental Health, you guys have done a great job of bringing up youth voice, lived experiencing, teaching leadership skills. And this is just great opportunities for kids. And those all build those protective factors. But I think having that ability and that knowledge right now to say, hey, this is something important for all kids in our community. And so that's where, we still have work to do, but kids are engaging. And that's the one thing when I look at them and I come in, I work with mental health projects with them. I am so impressed with these kids and what they're doing. I just can't, I just love this model, and I think it's a great thing. And my other point here is I'm really excited, as I said before, about how our data points may be affected by some things that we're doing locally with our YRBS. So we're always, like I said, I'm always watching that data point, where we're always looking at it as a collaborative in Racine to talk about, okay, what else do we need to do for our kids and build those protective factors.
Thanks, Julie. So many important points, and a great transition to the last question we want to put to all of our panelists. So what stands out for you in terms of youth mental health, and what are you hopeful about going forward? And Representative Billings, would you start us off on this question? You're on mute right now. There we go.
Thank you. What stands out for me is we have made progress over the last decade. In part, we are recognizing issues and tracking issues and specifically trying to address them in a concerted, organized way. And we had the dip during COVID, and working to address that. And I think to have the Wisconsin Office of Children's Mental Health is such an important piece of that, the work that's been done. And I think we can celebrate that. We have a lot to do moving forward. Absolutely. And as we're talking, I think about the important part schools play, also the important part that other organizations in the community have to play. Our healthcare facilities, our boys and girls clubs. I mean, in our area, we have incredible boys and girls clubs under wonderful leadership, doing great things with kids. And when you talk about organizations that where you walk in and spend some time there and you see the diversity of social backgrounds and the equity in those organizations, I'm always really happy to visit and see the new projects, the new work that they're doing. And in some ways they can be a little more flexible and adapt to situations. And so I appreciate all those organizations and my communities that work with kids. Children's mental health is something that we should all be able to agree on in the legislature, and the importance of this issue, the importance of the future with this issue. And hopefully, there's some areas where we just have these roadblocks, but hopefully this is an area. I know we've got good people who can work together behind the scenes that have this issue as a priority. So that gives me faith going forward as a legislator. And again, just the fact that I appreciate the Office of Children's Mental Health as they continue to educate us and provide information to us. We can't know everything, and we need the data to back up these policy changes, and to show. It's startling, the fact that I was fact checked for the first time in 13 years from this floor speech shows that that's information that I got from the Office of Children's Mental Health and DPI, and that backs up our efforts going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And when you talk about this should be an issue that everyone in the legislature can agree on, and leadership for that, you and Representative Snyder have been really being a part of that leadership as co-chairs of the Children's Caucus, keeping that conversation in the forefront. So just want to shout out that the two of you deserve a lot of credit for this.
Well,
So let's move on.
you,
Representative
Representative
Snyder,
Snyder.
it's your turn to address this question.
Well, thank you. I still go back to seems like we're a society, even as adults, we don't take a warning sign serious. If you have chest pains or things like that, you say, oh, it's just gas, I'll just get over it. And then suddenly you have a heart attack. We do the same thing when it comes to mental health. First of all, it's stigma, which people say is, suck it up, you'll get over it. The parent might say to the child if it's something traumatic happens. And we have to stop that. We have to treat mental illness like anything else. It's just our brain is part of our body. So we shouldn't be stigmatized by thinking, well, it's my fault. I can get over this. It's not. You need some folks you can talk with and work through that as well. So I think that's good. And as Jill said about the Boys and Girls Clubs, yes, they are very, very instrumental. But I think another area, and this is one I might be working on as a bill this session, is getting some funding to Big Brothers Big Sisters. I was a big to a young man 20 years ago, and second grader at the time, and now he's 27, married, and is a phys ed teacher at a school in my district, DC Everest. So single family, had some struggles, but you're there kind of as a mentor for him, someone he could talk with that maybe at home just mom was there and he had a sister, maybe didn't have the same avenues for it. So we can encourage more folks to be mentors that might help some of the families that are single parents, and let alone it's hard as a single parent just to keep the house running, but it's nice to have some support outside. But for some reason, we just have to get more folks interested into the psychiatry, psychologists, counselors to be able to talk with these kids. And, I had a child psychiatrist tell me in my district that she would love to have that annual checkup, make it, voluntary, but insurance companies cover it like they do our health care. And she said, start as young as 5 years old. And, I don't think that's a bad idea. We might catch some other things too, that the parents might need the help, as Jill said earlier, because a lot of times childhood mental health leads to adult mental health. And so if we could get to it earlier, I think some of the trends we see in high school, especially with young women, we might be able to head off before they get to that critical point. So look forward to keep working with Jill and all of you to make sure we can get the mental health more in the spotlight and assess better. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the ideas about things we can work on. So, Myra, would you like to pick up from there?
Yes, I would love to. All right. I just wanted to just touch a little bit on that last question right before I go into like the positive, just because I think there are like a few things that like are really important when we talk about belonging for kids and for students. I just kind of like think about like systems and communities, and I think about kids getting bused in from different communities and not being in neighborhood schools and how that takes away from a sense of belonging. Also being displaced. If you're, we know like a lot of data here in Madison, kids are going to different schools almost every year because they can't afford the rent, or your family gets displaced and then you move to a different neighborhood. So that also causes a lot of sense of like losing like belonging. I think curriculum, right? Like, do you see yourself in the curriculum? Do you see yourself in what teachers are teaching? And is the school safe in like actually physically and emotionally for kids, right? And so I just wanted to point out those things because I think it's like a huge factor on mental health for kids and like the sense of belonging, and that sometimes it's like not just like the school, sometimes it's other systems or other things that are going on like economically, and just the way different systems are created with like kids not even going to their neighborhood school, right? The parents never even get there. They don't have transportation. The kids are getting bused, but parents are also not connected to the schools and to teachers and all of those things. So it's just kind of like a little bit of a domino effect. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. But where I'm really positive and where I find like a lot of hope in things is about how positive kids are about talking about mental health. It is so accepted. I think about when I grew up, I had a therapist when I was a child. I would have never told anyone I was in therapy as a kid. And the kids and the youth that we talk to in our office, They see each other in the waiting room. They're not ashamed. They're not embarrassed. They talk to each other at school about mental health. I think the fact that we're talking about mental health in schools gives me a lot of hope. I remember, when I was coming up, if kids struggled or students struggled, there was like special classrooms for people, because it's like it wasn't labeled mental health, or there wasn't supports or resources for it. So the fact that we're talking about mental health and that we're naming it, and there's like a different narrative other than like you just have behavior problems, right? I think is very positive. The fact that we have programs in school, and also that we have referrals out, and that it is so normalized. I see mental health being talked about all over. I would say probably the biggest thing I have to do with kids now is tell them, don't self-diagnose yourself, and stop looking at TikTok for all of your mental health resources and answers. So that's a major cultural trend and shift. And so I think it's positive. I think that in those ways we are moving forward. And I have a lot of hope in youth and how they're embracing their mental health.
That's great. And we are really embracing that youth voice, because we just, we're seeing some of what you're saying there and wanting to support that. And we know that as youth use their voice and build their skills to talk about mental health and address it, that they feel better, and it better positions them for a healthy adulthood. So let me turn to Nick. What makes you hopeful, Nick?
I absolutely second that stigma is um going down. Um, Maybe it's just because I work specifically in the mental health field and disability field, but we are so open about it, to the point of like these are not bad words anymore. These are just descriptive words. I also really like the unity that I am seeing in youth. Yes, I talked a lot about schisms and feeling that dividing force from outside socialness, um but being able to find a community and then sticking with that community, the loyalty I see um in youth now is phenomenal. Being able to say, um no, this is my friend. I am not going to turn on them. Um, I am not going to abandon them just because XYZ. I am not going to leave them behind. I am not going to leave them out. We're not, or we are trying to combat that isolation by coming together and being that unified force. I've especially seen it in younger, like middle school and down, saying like, yes, these are my people, even if we're not friends, they are still my people. Linda, you are muted.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that. I got the message. I was muted. Sorry. I just wanted to say thank you for that message, and for the work that I know that you are doing with students right now to help that come about. So Julie, we're going to let you have the last word on this question. You shared some ideas with us before. Do you have more to say about this? What makes you hopeful?
Really makes me hopeful that youth are engaging in the mental health conversation, want to see things different. And really what is really positive too is, as I work with the Office of Children's Mental Health, bringing evidence-based programs, talking about this across the state, really starting to hone in with different partners, because we all have, for us, our community accepts that. Like when I go into Racine, I don't have to say, hey, mental health's a problem. We already get that. So I appreciate that. But in looking at what we want to do as a community, as a school, coming around that, and our community really supports helping our kids address their mental health concerns that they have. And so building, and what I want to see, my final reflection, the positiveness for the future is really for school districts to have enough money to do what they need to do to help support all kids. And that it really is my advocacy, talking to state legislators as we move into our next biennial budget to say, this is how we can do this. This is what we need to do. And I think all of us today are kind of saying that in a different way and looking at all the things that we can do to build those positive experiences. And I think somebody was putting in the chat, I'm a huge believer in infant mental health all the way up. Yes, yes, and yes, it doesn't start in high school. No, no, no. And really, there was a lot of chats about being preventative. Yes, that excites me to see that growth. And I really see us as, 10 years of children's mental health. The Racine Collaborative for Children's Mental Health has been in existence since 2012. And we're still here. We're still engaged in our community, and we're doing great work around the mental health of our kids. And so I think those pieces are the positiveness of how we can help support our youth and be there. And I also think that elevating youth voice, youth leadership, those are the things that really, really excite me. And I'm really starting to see a turn in our kids in our community being able to engage and feel that, sense of I belong in this community. And those are things, it takes time. It's not going to be a switch overnight. But what I do see is that starting to at least take some heat and some pull in our community to say, you are important to us and we want to be here to help support you.
That's wonderful. So such hopeful notes. So exciting. Gets us far beyond the data into where we can go in the future. Lots of things to work on, but so many positive notes. I want to stop and say a huge thank you to our panelists for your continued partnership with us throughout the year, for your time here together, and for participating in this panel and preparing it for today. At this time, though, I'd like to turn this over to Martina Golan-Graves, who is the chair of our OCMH Children's Mental Health Advisory Council and the president and CEO of Mental Health America Wisconsin. And Martina is going to share a few closing remarks with us. Martina?
Yes, thank you, Linda. And again, thank you to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise today, but also for reminding us to remain hopeful and that there is still so much light on this sometimes overwhelming topic. So thank you again. So 10 years of assessing how to improve children's lives in Wisconsin is paying off. We can see the power of collaboration in the numbers that were shared today. Of course, work still needs to be done, but we have strong data points that will help propel us forward. I hope today's reflection on the past 10 years has you thinking about what you can do collectively at your agencies or individually to continue making a collective impact to improve youth mental health and increase ways for increased social connectedness. In my work with OCMH and as a nonprofit leader, one thought that arises to the top for me is the power of advocacy and how it can be an action step that crosses all of the sectors represented here today and can be accomplished again collectively or even individually. We've heard from people with lived experience, providers, and legislators with ideas about how to increase screenings for youth, how to increase access to treatment, and innovative ideas for school-based services to increase social connectedness and school belonging. So again, I know you've heard a lot today, and there's a lot to think about. But we hope this conversation and other ideas for improving youth mental health and youth mental wellness will continue long after this meeting. So again, thank you for being here, for reflecting and celebrating youth and families in Wisconsin. Happy holidays. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.